All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for jumping on. My name is Rebecca Cybulski. I'm from the Junior Library Guild, and I'll be helping to host this webcast today. Get ready to learn more about how author Rachel Toalson navigates her writing process, the recipes she uses to show off her Instagram-worthy baking skills, and why she believes everyone should have the freedom to read. You'll also get to see how she supports young readers with her free online tools, and will even get to take place in a special poetry lesson today. Sit back, relax, get ready to have some fun. And before we begin, I'm going to hand the mic over to Hannah so she can go over a few housekeeping items.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be with you all today. We wanted to let you know that this webcast is being recorded. So if you know someone who can't be here live or you can't stay the entire hour, we have you covered. Anyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with a link to the on-demand recording. It will also be available next week on our website at juniorlibraryguild.com or our YouTube channel. So please feel free to share the recording with fellow librarians, teachers, friends, and readers. If you are new to Zoom and want to change your screen view, you could do so on the top right. We recommend side-by-side view because we will be sharing pictures and visuals along the way. You can also hover over the boundary between the shared screen and the speaker's video to adjust the size of each view. We are so happy that you all are here, and thank you for submitting all your questions. We're going to ask as many as we can today. So thank you so much. And Rebecca, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hannah. And one other quick reminder, we do have some poll questions for the audience today, and we'll introduce those on various slides. We'll give you a heads up when we release those poll questions, and we'll also share the results after we're kind of done talking about it. All right. So first, we're going to start with introductions. Today, our featured guest is Rachel Toalson. She is the author of many other of The First Magnificent Summer and many other books, including poetry books, collections of essays, and series like the Crash Test Parent series and the Farendale series. We're so grateful that she could join us today. Thank you for all your hard work and all the amazing time and effort you've put into this webcast, and for all the time you've spent making wonderful children's books. Next, joining us from the JLG editorial team is Nicole Martin. She is an editorial assistant for the Junior Library Guild. She reads for the following categories: intermediate readers, advanced readers, mystery and adventure elementary, and then mystery and adventure middle, and high interest reading middle. She is among the team who helped select the best children's books for your JLG book box. And then joining us from our marketing team is Hannah McCarthy, who works as our automation manager. Hannah is a Zoom wizard. She excels in the field of technology. She does a lot of behind the scenes work for us, and we couldn't do it without her. So thank you, Hannah. Lastly, my name is Rebecca Cybulski, and I work as a marketing copywriter at the Junior Library Guild. And the best part of my job is connecting with authors, illustrators, book creators, for JLG blogs and our webcasts. This has been such a fun team to work with, and I'm so grateful for all the time and effort that everyone has dedicated to the webcast. So thank you all for being here. All right, so first we're going to launch our first poll question. So kind of while we're going through this slide, if you want to look at that first poll question and submit your answer, we'll go ahead and share those answers at the end. All right, so Rachel, tell us about yourself. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into writing, your exquisite baking skills that we see on your Instagram all the time, and then maybe a little bit about your YouTube channel called Real Talk with Rachel.
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me here. I feel very grateful to be here. So my background, I grew up in a very small town in Texas and was the middle child, so the overlooked person in the home. I'm just kidding. So I had a single mom. My parents divorced when I was 11. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, so there was nothing much to do except like tell stories or go run through cow fields and stuff. So I did both of those things and kind of became like a documentarian for my family because I always journaled. So that kind of set me on, I think the first time I read a book, I just thought, this is what I want to do because it brought so much joy. And I don't know, like there were things that I could see in my imagination, and I wanted to do that for other people. So that set me on a path to becoming an author. I have a degree in journalism, actually, and English. And so I started probably I guess it was the first 15 years of my career is in journalism as a reporter and then a managing editor, and always had a dream to be an author. So I can't even remember what year it was. It was right after my last son was born. I just decided I'm going to go for this, and I did. So that's where we are. As far as my baking skills, I don't know if I'm not like a master baker or anything, but when every summer my sons and I take a week with each son and they get to pick treats that we bake together. It's like a summer tradition. So I always share those treats. And sometimes like, baking with an 8-year-old doesn't always turn out all that great, but it's really good to eat. So, so I love baking. And then real
treat that you make?
Oh gosh, all of them. I love all of them. No, I think I have one son who every single summer will pick anything that's lemon in the cookbooks, and that's probably my favorite. I love the lemony, citrusy fruits, So, and then as far as Real Talk is concerned, I've had a YouTube channel where I kind of talk about books. And then I decided there were some things that were just kind of like coming up in me. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to start a YouTube channel where I just share about things like book banning and like feminism, which is really important to me. And I think on the screen here, we have I Love the 90s, and it's kind of about why authors write about the 90s. So it's just really anything that when I'm going throughout my week, what I read in the newspaper, or it's kind of a response, or if something is weighing heavily on my mind, I just do a real talk about it, So it's a lot of fun, and it gives me a place where I can share who I am and hopefully make a difference in other people's lives. So
I love that. And when I was going through your YouTube channel, I actually found a great video about Ohio, which I thought was super relatable. So if anyone on the call is from Ohio or has visited Ohio, I definitely suggest you check out Rachel's Ohio video on her YouTube channel.
Oh, that's great.
And so, your book, The First Magnificent Summer, it's a Junior Library Guild selection. It's one of the best books that our editors were reading that year. And your title, I kind of want to know, what makes you feel like an experience or a person is so worthy of being magnificent?
Well, it's probably not a surprise to anybody, but I think everybody is magnificent just the way they are. And that's kind of the message I wanted to portray in the book, is that we don't have to be anything exceptional. We don't have to, I'm going to get emotional here because this is like, it's an important thing that I try to teach my kids too, that they don't have to make a certain grade on a test. They don't have to be exceptional at theater or play the best part on the clarinet or something like that. They can just be who they are, and they're already magnificent. So that's a big deal to me. I feel like we're all magnificent because we're different, and because we're different, that's what makes life so beautiful. We get to see all these different people who think in different ways, and it's just a magnificent thing. And as far as an experience, I think it's really anything that makes me feel something, something good, most likely, a strong emotion. So sometimes I remember the other day I was, not feeling all that great. And my 8-year-old comes up to me and he gives me a hug and he said, it was initiated by him. And he says, "I love you." And I was like in tears, because that's a magnificent moment that a kid is able to like initiate. Typically parents are the ones who initiate the little hugs and "I love yous," but it was a kid who did it. And that's, it's just little moments like that, and big moments too, watching a son perform on stage as the lead in a musical or something. Those are all magnificent moments. I feel like I'm always talking about my kids, but there are other magnificent moments, not just kid moments.
Well, awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I think that's such a wonderful message that readers can take away from your book. And so I did want to let everyone know the responses on our poll question. So the question was, what is your treat of choice? And we had almost 20% of people say cookies. I hope you were around for the Cookie Chronicles webcast if you really liked cookies. We had about 10% say pies. Oh, 0% said cakes. No cake lovers.
Wow.
Brownies, 30%. Brownies are always great.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the treats was the winner with 42%.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Anything.
Just give me the sugar, right?
That's right.
Awesome. I'm going to hand the mic over to Nicole now.
Okay.
Right. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more, Rachel, about the craft of writing. You've already touched a little bit on some of these questions in your background response, but just to jump right into it, like Victoria, did you always know that you wanted to be an author?
Definitely. I think from the first time I read a story, like I said, I knew that I wanted to do that. And I actually, when I was a kid, I walked around with stapled sheets of paper, like computer paper, that my mom would provide for me. And I wrote stories all the time. Like, she has so many of these Rachel authored stories from when I was like 5. So
That's
yeah.
so adorable. Yeah, my mom still has a cupboard too of some of my things that I wrote, because I started off my journey of getting into books as wanting to be on the writing side. Because of course, when you're a kid, you don't know that like there's all these other people behind the book process.
Right.
But yeah, I have like this little octopus story from first grade that I don't think she'll ever trash, but that's really cute. And so would you want to talk a little bit more about what your journey from being sort of a kid writer to an adult writer looked like, and also why along the way you decided that you wanted to write for kids specifically?
Yeah. So I tell people often that I feel like I'm kind of stuck in the middle grade space, as I had a lot of trauma happen to me between the ages of like 10 and 14. And so I think writing for kids, it's kind of my way of working through that trauma, but also making sure that other kids either feel seen and feel like they have a character who shows them that it's possible to survive those things, but also just providing a space for people or for kids who don't go through some of that stuff to be able to develop empathy for the kids who are struggling in those. So that's kind of like my mission behind being a kids book author. I love middle grade is my favorite genre to read. So because I read so many middle grade books, that's the space I have. I have a 12-year-old inside of me that's like constantly writing. So that's, I write for adults and stuff, but the most enjoyable stories that I write are the ones that I write for kids.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's why I love reading middle grade so much, is because that's an age where you can feel so alone, and like every experience is something that's unique to you. Like you think, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world. Nobody's ever experienced this before. So it's great to have books like The First Magnificent Summer where it's like, oh no, actually other people have been there, they've done that, and they survived, and I can make it through too. So it's really great to hear stories.
Well, and one thing about middle grade too is that I feel like it's always ends on hope. We have, when I read adult novels, I'm always like, oh man, I have so many problems in my life. And now I have to deal with these problems for the character, and it may not turn out happily, you know?
Yeah,
But in
that's
middle
true.
grade, it may not turn out happily, but it at least provides hope. So I'm like, maybe my adult novels sound like kids novels because I always feel like I have to end on hope.
I think hope is
I don't
something
know.
that we can all use. So I think that's, even if
Yeah.
you're infusing that hope into adult novels, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because I know as an adult, I could definitely use a slice of hope every now and then. It's been
Yeah.
a pretty bleak world for the past few years.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to move on to the next question, so what does your writing process entail? Do you want to talk a little bit more about how long it took you to write the first Magnificent Summer, and kind of what those steps to, from your kind of idea moment, and maybe even how you get those ideas all the way up until that finished product? If you wanted to kind of walk
Yeah.
us through, I know some of our questions that we received from the audience were interested in kind of more of that nitty-gritty craft of writing.
Yeah. Well, it kind of depends on the story as far as like what the writing process is, but typically from idea to, published book, I carry around an idea journal. So anything that kind of sparks my curiosity, I write down in this journal. And sometimes it'll be like yesterday I was reading Ms. Magazine and I got this idea for a story, and I just wrote it down because I'm like, I can't start on it now because I'm working on other projects, but in sometime in the future, I might get around to that. So I have a huge list of ideas of stories that I want to tell. And then when it's time to work on one, I will typically spend a lot of time doing a brainstorm and kind of just getting to know the character, and then move on to a first draft. And then depending on the story, it typically takes 3 or 4 drafts. This book took I think I want to say 8 drafts, because it started out as a prose story, and then I turned it into a novel in verse, and then I turned it back into prose, and I was like, I don't know what format to use for this. So I was just kind of experimenting with formats. And you think about, I mean, it's like a 65,000 word story, and you turn that back in, you're reading it that many times and rewriting it that many times. And then I had several more drafts where I was like, I really don't know what I'm doing here. And then I turned it into a journal entry format, because I wrote in journals as a 12-year-old girl, and I felt like that was just the most natural thing for that. So after that, I did some more drafts to layer in humor and stuff like that. So it really depends on a story, but I'd say it probably takes between 4 and 7, sometimes more than 7, depending on the story, drafts. So
Wow.
a lot of rewriting that. And I always want to tell, less experienced writers that that's where the magic happens, because I write a draft from start to finish. Like when I'm doing the first draft, I don't revise anything along the way. I just get it all down, and then revision is where the magic happens. So
That's awesome. Kind of thinking about that revision process, how much of like the characters changed along the way? Was Tori kind of the same person from start to finish?
oh, definitely. She's like 12-year-old me. So she was definitely, I layered in a little more sarcasm because that's how I was as a 12-year-old too. So as the drafts, she got a little bit more sarcastic and stuff as the drafts progressed.
I love that. We love a snarky main character.
Yeah.
A little bit of snark, a little bit of feistiness makes it a lot more fun
Right.
to read. But
Yep.
Rebecca, did you want to advance to the next slide?
Sure, yeah. And so this is kind of a great segue. You've talked to us about your editing process. You've talked to us about how you kind of took a story 8 times back and forth, trying to work on characters, on setting, on writing. Can you tell us a little bit about the publishing side of things? How did you take your manuscript, your beloved words, and turn it into a real book? What did that process look like?
Okay. So this book I do most of my rough drafts by hand. So this one started out really in a journal. It wasn't in journal format yet, but then I transcribe it onto the computer, which allows me to read it and make notes on, things that need to change. So, so I did that, and then I send it off to my agent. This is not my first book, so I wasn't like looking for an agent or anything. I have an agent and was able to just send it to her. She will look it over, give me, notes for revision, which for this one, we actually didn't have very many. She was like, I feel like I can take this out right now. And so she took it out on submission. It took probably, I think it was like 3 months before we got an offer on it. So then an editor will offer on the book, and you can decide if you want to take that offer or, if you want to go with something else. And we accepted the offer. And then from then it was like 18 months, I think it took to get it to a published book. So it's a lot of time. Like this book was finished. It just came out this year, which is 2023. And it was finished, I think, in 2020. It was like right before the pandemic and everything happened. And so, and that's just, 3 years from when you finish it to when it publishes is a long time. And you grow as a writer too. So, it's always a challenge. Sometimes I'm like, I don't enjoy reading my past stuff because I feel like I've grown as a writer and I would do it differently today than I did it,
Sure.
then. But that's kind of the process from start to finish.
Okay.
Is that what y'all were looking for? Is that?
It looks like that's what people wanted to talk about. We
Okay.
did have 2 questions in the chat. Catherine wanted to know how long it took for you to write this book from start to finish.
Well, because it required so many revisions, because I was still trying to figure out what the format was going to be, it took me probably 3 years. And it's a very difficult story. There's a lot of my story that I share with Victoria. So a lot of that was like, I had to take breaks from the story and then go back to it. So I would say it was about 3 years start to finish, but most of my books take maybe 6 months start to finish. So this one was an exception because it was so hard to tell, but also I couldn't get the format. So most of the time I know this is going to be a prose novel. This is going to be a novel in verse, but I just, I couldn't do that with this one. And I think it landed in a really good place. Like if I had published it in prose, it wouldn't have been the same story. So.
Wonderful. We also had another question from Amy. She wanted to know, how do you decide on who your illustrator will be? And for this question, I think it might be helpful to talk maybe about like your jacket cover art, how that came in to be.
So the publisher takes care of all of that. So what they ended up doing is they proposed a few scenes that they wanted to maybe illustrate from the book that we could use as the cover. And I kind of gave them ideas, like I wanted it to look hopeful. I wanted it to have bright colors, so it didn't look depressing or anything, but it was like symbolic of Victoria's hope for this summer that she was spending with her dad. And then they choose the illustrator, and the illustrator will kind of mock up several different versions of a scene or whatever the editor is asking them for. So I didn't have a whole lot of, hands-on things that I did with the cover. It was more like I had to provide details, like what did Victoria's hair look like and things like that, so that the illustrator could get it correct. So I was glad they took that because I'm not an illustrator. So I think this one it's illustrated by Svetla Radioeva, who I think she used to work for Disney, and you can kind of see some of those elements in like Victoria on the cover, her big toe is like pointing up, and I was like, I love that detail. So it's one of my favorites.
They definitely did a wonderful job with the cover art and even the icons in the book as well.
Yes. Yeah, I was very pleased with it.
Good. So as far as, there's probably some aspiring writers on the call. or there might be some aspiring writers who watch this video when it's recorded. Do you have any advice for them kind of going into that publishing process?
Well, I would say probably the biggest piece of advice I give the most often is just take care of yourself, because there's so much rejection at every part of the process. Like when you query an agent, the majority of the responses you get are rejections. When you're taking your book out on submission to editors, the majority of the responses are rejections. And that can be really disheartening. And it can start to make you, I still deal with this today. And, I've published a lot of books, but it can make you start to feel like you are just not good at what you do. You start to question yourself, but taking care of yourself, surrounding yourself with people who believe in you, with people who understand the journey you're going on. I have a group of writer friends, and we get together every morning to write together. And then at the end of it, we kind of talk about the publishing business and where we are in our careers. And it's so helpful to have something like that, because you're not alone and you're not losing your mind because you feel like the world is against you, So that's probably the biggest piece of advice I have. And then never give up, because somebody somewhere is going to love your story, whether that's an agent, an editor, or a reader, so.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And Nicole, I see your cat wants to be in the video. Would they like to ask a question to Rachel?
Sorry, my roommate left during the middle of this, and they let my cat out. He was shut in my room, so he is now wandering around. But he will hopefully stay off camera for now. He doesn't really have many intelligent questions. His head is kind of full of fluff and stuff. But he definitely didn't read this book. But we can talk a little bit more about the craft of writing and move on into that direction. So I know you talked a little bit about journaling earlier and how that's something that you've always been someone who does, even when you were a preteen, like Tori's age. So as we talk a little bit about, the Tori's voice throughout the novel and the authenticity there and how you channel your inner 12-year-old, do you want to touch a little bit on how journaling might have played a role in that, and whether you revisited any of those journals or any other part of that process of capturing that authentic 12-year-old voice?
Yeah. Well, I have journaled since I was a little girl. I was very private with my journals. I didn't want anybody to read it. Some of the comments that Victoria makes in the story, like, Jack, if you're reading, you need to stop reading. That was like me as a kid, because my brother was always trying to get my journals. So part of it is, when you journal as much as I did, and still do today, I still journal probably at least 2 pages every day, but you really develop your voice, and so that was really helpful. I also revisited some of the journals that I had as a 12-year-old to kind of get into that headspace again. Like I said, I feel like I have a 12-year-old Rachel still inside me. So the voice feels very natural to me, but I also revisited some of those things. And then I have a lot of kids, and several of them are in that age group. So I'm a nosy person, and I listen in on conversations, and, I think teachers have some of the best access to the ways that, 10 through 14-year-olds talk, because they're in those classes with them every day. And, I try to do that with my kids, just like eavesdrop, because it really gets you, like, you understand what's important to them, and you also understand the way they talk. So.
Well, I have to say that I think that was one of the strongest elements of the novel for me, was how authentic it felt. It really, really felt, and that helped with the raw emotion of it too, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about later. But when you're reading something that it really feels like, the kind of angst and just deep feelings that you have when you're in that age range, that's something that I think is hard to kind of tap into for a lot of adults, and getting into that preteen headspace. So that was something that I really loved, and I'm excited to see more in your future writing.
Thank you.
But yeah. So Rebecca, did you want to move to the next slide? Awesome. Yep. So here we go. That sort of raw emotion that's portrayed throughout the novel. It really makes you think about what the inspiration was for this, because as the reader, it feels so personal. And I know you've tapped a little bit into this already. You've touched on how a lot of Victoria is kind of you when you were her age. But do you want to touch on that a little bit more, what the inspiration was and maybe why you decided to write about that inspiration or maybe those memories now?
Yeah. Well, so I share Victoria's experience with the first period for sure. I was very unprepared for my first period. And I remember my mom, before I went to visit this is the first summer we went to visit my dad after my parents divorced and he had a new family. And I just remember her saying, this is why I use the terminology in the story. I remember her saying, while you're visiting your dad, you may have a visitor who comes. And here are the woman supplies that you will need to use for this visitor. And it was like all so confusing. And we had been through the thing at school, but like nothing prepares you for the first period experience. And the fact that as soon as we got to Ohio, it was actually Mansfield, Ohio. I changed it for the story, but as soon as we got there, it was a horrible trip because it was a road trip. And as soon as we got there, I start my period and I am so ill prepared. I didn't have enough supplies. So a lot of that emotion came into this book because it's like, there's a panicky emotion where you don't really know what you're doing and you don't know what you're dealing with and how long does the visitor last and do I have enough supplies, and it's a humiliating thing to have to go to this parent who first of all is a dad, which I'm not saying that there aren't dads who cultivate those kinds of relationships with their kids, but my dad was not I know everything about women kind of dad,
Right.
And so having to approach somebody and ask for more supplies or even let them know that you started your first period, like that's, oh my gosh, I can still remember, like my face is heating up because it was just, it was that experience. And I had only just met my new stepmom. And so, she wasn't a person I could go to either. And so I tried to capture all of those emotions in this story because I feel like that's not, and I've heard from a lot of readers that this is not an experience that is unusual, especially when parents are divorced and somebody goes to see their dad or something. It's kind of amazing how many adults I've heard from who are like, that's like my first period story. So there was that. And then as far as revisiting the moment now, I think it was, I think it was just time. I had to work through some of those things. And there were some hard things that happened to me during that summer. And I had to work through some of those. And it took me, this isn't my first book. So it took me several books to have the courage to approach some of those things, so I think for me, it was like it was a time in my healing and all of the emotional things that I was dealing with that I just wanted to approach the story and figure out how can I write a better ending to something that happened, so.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like it's definitely not something that's a one-off kind of experience. I heard a story on NPR over the weekend on the moth, and it was a very similar kind of a period story. It was like a girl whose parents were divorced, and she was talking about when she went to the beach on a beach trip with her dad and her brother. And so it made me think immediately of this book because I was
Yeah.
thinking, man, if this girl had this book when she was growing up, and
Oh my
I know
gosh.
too, there's just so much. I mean, you talked about courage and having the courage to tell this story. And I think there is so much courage that's required even today to just talk about menstruation because there's so much shame that's been built into our culture around
Yeah.
it. And I remember growing up and reading like, 17 and things like that. And at the back, they would have those kind of like really terrible
Oh, those
stories that
period
happen.
stories?
Yeah, that you
Yeah.
can write in. Yeah. And
Oh,
so many
yeah.
of them were period stories.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
reading them, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the worst thing that ever happens to me. Like, what
Yeah.
it's going to happen in the hallway. It's going to happen while I'm playing gym at school. Like I was living in fear.
Yeah.
So having a book like
I
this.
read those same things too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
And
that,
I feel
thank
like
you.
in middle grade literature too, it has been something that's ignored. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, every time I write a girl character, it's like, if she's of a certain age, she's going to be dealing with it. Like, it doesn't
Right.
even matter if it's not, it doesn't always have to be a big deal, but you know, I feel like, why do we never write about girls who are going throughout, 3 months and she never has a period?
Yeah.
She's going to have it at some point, so yeah,
I love
let's
that.
make it normal.
Yep. That's fantastic. I think that's all on this slide. So Rebecca, did you want to move to the next slide?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I really do think that's what makes this book so special. You make it so that readers don't have to go through these hard and very real life occurrences alone. And so this question kind of talks about that. As you're growing up, your character Victoria, she's becoming a teenager, and she's learning that life is a little bit trickier than she thought it might be with these complex relationships. She's trying to deal with her father, her new stepmom. She's trying to figure out who she is as a person and, who she wants to be as a writer. There's times where she questions her self-worth, and other hardships. And so as she kind of navigates adolescence, she notes that there are many worse days in life, but you learn to wave at them as they pass by. I think that was such a wonderful and memorable quote from your book. So what do you hope that readers take away from Tori's struggles, and her persistent strength, and how she kind of goes about her worst days?
Well, I think the biggest thing I want them to take away is that we are magnificent just the way we are. We don't have to let somebody else define who we are. And we can, if people are defining that in the wrong way, we can break away from that. That's the biggest thing. But also, it's always important for me that readers can take away that if they are going through a hard time like this or something similar, they don't have to be defined by that either, and that they're strong enough to cope with whatever is coming. It may not feel like that in the moment, but with perspective, we can do that. So the concept of waving at the worst days as they go by, I think it's just a matter of perspective. So in the moment, it feels like this is the end of the world. And then as you have another worst day, you have perspective on that other one that says, oh, well, I made it through that worst day. I guess I can make it through this one too. We may as well see, So I think journaling helps with that. I'm just going to do a plug for journaling there, because you can recognize patterns and you can see things that you've healed from or, survived. So highly recommend journaling.
This is very real for your audience too. Like, middle school is just filled with those worst days, one after one, just learning how to be yourself and be confident in who you want to be. So I think it's great that you have this message for your readers.
Yeah.
And so Hannah's going to launch our third poll question, but I did want to share the answers from the second one. We asked, what is your favorite kind of story? And so one person answered and said they like a scary story. 32%, so we have a tie. 32% of people said they liked realistic world stories. And another 32% of people said they liked a fantasy story. 5% said they liked science. And almost 30% said they wanted to laugh when they read a book.
Yeah.
So we're kind of all over the place on this one, which is good because there's so many readers in the world and so much literature. Awesome. Hannah's going to launch that third poll question. And Nicole, do you want to take it away?
I want to plug a few of our JLG categories for some of those genres. If you like scary stories, definitely check out two of the categories that I read for, the mystery elementary and mystery middle. It's called mystery, but we also take horror books in those categories. So if you like scary, that's a good place to look. And for funny stories, I love the high interest reading category. There's a lot of this kind of like laugh out loud, a little bit of bathroom humor here and there. So those are some good ones to check out if those are your things. We have some great fantasy stuff too in the fantasy category, but I don't read for that one, so I can't talk a whole lot about it. But getting back to this book and this awesome category, which is this book went in our advanced reader category, so it's for our older range of the middle grade spectrum. So you're talking a little bit, Rebecca, about how middle school is such a hard time for like all these changes in your life. So that kind of brings us to this next slide. Because one of those things that changes is your body. And, you know, a lot of people start going through puberty and you start to change in ways that, you know, maybe you're not prepared for. Maybe you start gaining weight in different places. Maybe you just start gaining weight all over. And so it can be a time when questions and comments and criticism, that you maybe unsolicited criticism and feedback start to come in from relatives and friends and family members. And that's something that Tori is experiencing a lot in the first Magnificent Summer from her father, who provides her with some feedback on her weight and, you know, about her eating habits and things like that. And at one point, Tori even remarks that she'd rather go hungry than be criticized, which just hit me right in the feels. And this negative language, you know, we know that this is super harmful and destructive, and we shouldn't really be commenting on people's weight and sizes in this way. And it's something that's a real challenge for Tori to navigate as she makes that transition into adolescence. So, Rachel, as a mother and as an author of children's books, do you feel like there's progress being made in this area, you know, of body positivity and the way that we talk about, especially young girls and their weight and their bodies? And do you think that there's still work to be done in that regard and that we can do better there? This is kind of open for you to explore this question however you'd like.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think there's still more work to be done. I don't think we're ever finished with it. I do appreciate everything that the body positivity movement has done for young girls and teenage girls, but I don't think it's enough. And the reason I think that is not only because it kind of there's just a certain perception of who is involved in that body positivity movement, and it's typically, you know, not people of color. It's typically all women. It's, you know, so it's exclusive, and we need to move a little more in an inclusive direction. But also, I feel like I'm not going to like. I feel like I'm not saying all that well, but I also feel like when we say body positivity movement, we're also still focused on the body. And I am a survivor of anorexia. I live with body dysmorphia every day. My struggle started when I was 11. It was when I went into 6th grade, I started skipping lunch, and then that progressed to dinner. And then, you know, so there, as a person from that perspective, I feel like the ways that we can make the most gains is to just not be focused on the body at all, as far as I don't even know how to do this, but as far as, you know, an object of beauty, or, you know, we still see in the media, we still see some of the same things that we saw when I was a teenager, where women are airbrushed and we only see the perfect version of who they are, even ones who are not, you know, the model thin that I had as a teenager, when it was the times of like Kate Moss and people who were actually dying of anorexia. Even though we've embraced some of this, we still have some of the same things that are happening. Every time I watch a show on a streaming device, the main characters are beautiful, skinny people. And so it's just like, you know, how have we not progressed any farther than this? And I think part of it is that this is going to sound terrible, but we need to get more women in charge, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's for that.
So that's kind of my 2 cents on, I really do appreciate what the body positivity movement has done. But I just think we need to go farther. So.
Yeah, I mean, on the topic of watching streaming channels and things like that too, is so many of those people who are playing teenagers are like 30 years old or 28 years old or something like that. So of
Yeah.
course they don't have the baby fat anymore, or
Right.
they've already
Yeah.
long past. So it's totally unrealistic to be watching those as a 12-year-old and thinking that's what I'm supposed to look like when I'm 16. Like I've got 4 years to go from this to that full grown woman looking body that's filled out in all the right places. Yep.
And puberty is so hard for girls too, because I mean, it's hard for everybody. I have several sons going through it too. And I'm like, I'm glad I'm not you. But for girls, there are lots of things that are expanding, and so I don't know if you see pictures of just terribly skinny people and your hips are starting to widen and you're getting breasts, it's like, yeah, it's just a bad picture. I do explore this in another book a little more about that. I think we'll share about at the end. So about the puberty and how our bodies change during puberty and how hard it is. Like, you're knocking things off desks as you pass your fellow students because you suddenly have hips and you didn't realize it. And, so.
And Rachel, I did want to share some pictures you had sent over of your family.
Oh.
I know you had said, you're kind of navigating puberty with your young boys right now. And you said, oh, I wouldn't want to go through that again. Do you want to talk a little bit about your family?
Yeah, so I am a mom of 6 boys, and they were all born in a span of 8 years. So it was really, really crazy for a while. But my oldest is now 16 and my youngest is 8. So it's a little more manageable. But several of them, I have 3 in middle school. So it's kind of that, that middle school crowd and going through puberty. I have 3 teenagers. So that's a lot of fun in the house. But they're brilliant and they're wonderful. And, we're all neurodivergent. And so it's a very fun house. So.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing these wonderful pictures. And we have to know, what's your cat's name?
Well, I have 2 cats. I think the first one didn't get in any photos, but that one there is named River. And then we have a black cat who's named Harris. So actually in my poetry section, I wrote a poem about him. So you'll get to hear a little bit about his personality.
And we have Nicole's cat on the call today. So it worked perfectly.
He's gone off, thankfully, somewhere to go sleep and probably soak in some of the sunbeams, but his name is Jasper if he does make an appearance again.
Great.
So we wanted to talk, of course, given the current climate around book banning, I know that this is something that our librarian audience has top of mind. And so it's something that we wanted to talk with you a little bit about, especially with you being from Texas, which has been one of the states that has been kind of leading this push to ban books in schools and to implement new policies to restrict the kind of books that kids are able to read. And kind of tying this into the First Magnificent Summer, Tori is heavily inspired by these kind of more mature authors and poets such as Virginia Woolf and Simone de Beauvoir. And she lives in Texas, which, as we said, is now one of these leading states in the book ban movement. So if she was living in 2023, she might not really have access to those kind of authors and voices. And a lot of kids growing up in these states where book banning is happening might not have access to your works either, especially if some of these radical policies continue to go forward. So without that freedom to read, do you think that Tori's story and her resolve, despite her really difficult situation, would change? And do you want to talk a little bit about why it's important to make these kind of difficult and maybe topics that some people see as controversial, digestible and accessible for young readers?
Yeah, I'm going to refer to my notes on this because this was one that I was like, I want to make sure I make all the points. So, but without reading some of the authors that are, that are talked about in The First Magnificent Summer, Victoria would have been missing a piece of her healing. And that's kind of what books were for me as a kid, is a place where I could either disengage from the world and enter a world where it was completely different from my reality, or it was a place where I could find characters like me who were experiencing some of the same things that I did as a kid. Granted, there weren't a lot of stories about kids who were experiencing the same things I was experiencing. But kids can see themselves in stories, and they can find a character they identify with that can show them how resilient they can be in their everyday lives or in things that are happening to them. And I feel like Tori's understanding of herself and her empathy for her father, despite everything he did, it was honed in books, because books are a pathway to empathy. And so when we take away access to those books, we are we're not doing our kids any kind of service in the empathy department. And I know from stories that my sons have told me, we need help in that department, especially in the middle school crowd. Books mold her, but also uphold her. And that's kind of what I feel like books do for kids, is that they can mold the ways that they think and who they become. But they can also infuse them with hope and encouragement and a way forward, if that makes sense. So I feel like it's important to make those topics digestible to kids, because these young readers are dealing with things that some of us can't even imagine. And we don't want to imagine it because we want every kid to be in I'm going to get emotional again. We want every kid to be in a situation where they are loved and they have support. But the reality is that's not what it's like for every kid. And so providing them these stories can help them feel less alone. It's a very, very lonely place for a kid like Victoria, who is going through the things she's going through. I know this because I was one of those kids. But books can be a safe place to think about and digest and discuss those topics. So.
Thank you so much. That's a really beautiful answer. I think we can just leave it there. Rebecca, if you want to move on to the next slide, that was a great answer.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for your vulnerability in answering this. I think a lot of young readers are going through this and they need to hear that. So thank you. So now we're going to lighten the mood a little bit, and we're going to write poetry with Rachel. And so Rachel's going to go ahead and share her screen. And okay. I know we're getting to that hour. So if you need to jump off, just know that this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel and our website. And we'll also record this poetry section with Rachel as one video. So that way, if you want to use it in the classroom or if you'd like to review it later, you can.
So it's saying that I can't share my screen while the other participant is sharing. So do we have to get out of I don't think we practiced that part.
Great. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing on 3, and then maybe 5.
Okay.
Oh, awesome. We love it when technology works.
Right? I know. All right. So I did this a little bit differently because I knew that I was going to be talking to librarians and teachers and other people who were interested. So I kind of took it in a direction of getting young people interested in poetry. So this is something I'm very passionate about. I do it with my kids all the time. So here we go. Kids are natural poets. I think we probably all know that. They are also natural storytellers. So from the youngest ages, They are drawn to stories, especially those with a lyrical quality about them, like picture books, rhyming picture books, prose that sounds like poetry, and silly made up nonsense words like Runny Babbitt, if y'all have ever read. I love Shel Silverstein. He's one of my favorites. So my kids love him too. So some of the earliest writing kids do is short and expressive and measured, like poetry is. But somewhere along the way, they lose that interest in writing poetry. And I always ask the question, why? But I can't ever really answer it. But I do believe they never lose their love for it. So I want to explore how we can nurture that love. And here are my suggestions. Take away the rules. So let's not worry about meter and rhyme and counting syllables and structure, form, theme, diction, all of those technical things. We just let them play and have fun and write about anything and say anything they want to say. They can make up their own rules and their own words if they want. We can analyze the poems after they're done playing. But I also have a stipulation here. Don't make judgments, because we all have our own voice and style, and it's important to nurture that. I've met a lot of kids, and I was a kid myself who sometimes got discouraged by the things that we said about our poetry. So that it's important to me. I've seen my kids get discouraged, and that as a mom is just like, I'm a mom author. You're going to write. So So here's a prompt. I also provided some prompts for each of these suggestions so that you could use them in your classrooms or, in your libraries. So this is one that I use with kids a lot because kids, they experience emotions so strongly. So I asked them to think about something that made them very angry today or recently, and then write an angry poem about it. It can be a letter poem directed at what or who made you angry. And I make sure they know if it's a who, just make sure you're still kind. It can be an expression of your anger in short and angry words, or it can just simply explain why you're angry. So here's one of mine that I call this beat poetry. I can taste it. There is a rage in me that swells wild in the face of injustice. And it can be as short and sweet as that, And I tell them, guess what? Now you've written a beat poem like Allen Ginsberg, Neil Cassidy, or Diane DePrima. So they get to join the ranks of beat poets. Number 2 is keep it short, but also make it challenging. This is something I use. I mentioned I have a house full of neurodivergent people, and they're all gifted. And so I have to give them challenges. So introduce a challenge into short poetry forms like haiku, acrostic, limerick, tanka. Kids love it when things feel like a game. So let's make it like a game. Acrostics are probably one of the most popular forms of poetry among kids. And what I see in poetry workshops is they will typically, write the word that's going to be used in the acrostic, and then they'll just use one word per line. So we can make it more challenging by telling them to write a story in the poem and have more than one word per line. Or we can have them use 6 connecting haikus or 3 limericks to tell a short story about their pet or their best friend or what happened at their last family dinner. Or we can ask them to collaborate with another student where one writes a tanka and the next writes one that connects to the first. And they trade off until they've told a story. And I have here that would pair well with a reading of Nikki Grimes's Garvey's Choice. So that whole book is written in tanka poetry. Introducing challenges to simple poetry forms can feel like a game or a puzzle. I do say, though, make sure to give them an example of these things so they don't get overwhelmed, because sometimes when we give them challenges, they can, they can't really see what it's like in their minds. So giving them an example is really helpful. Or write with them. That's what I do with my kids. I'll write with them. So here's the prompt. Write an acrostic poem using the word magnificent, but make sure it tells a story. And here is mine. His name should be exigent. My cat is always groaning and mumbling. nagging me to itch his ears, but my fingers are instead clutching a pen and writing entertaining poems for nobody and everybody. So talk to me tomorrow, Harris. And my third suggestion is make it concrete. Poetry can be hands-on, so you can introduce art into poetry. Blackout poetry or erasure poetry is one of my favorite art forms to practice with kids. My kids and I do this all the time because we still subscribe to the newspaper. So they'll do that, or they'll rip out a page from a magazine and do blackout poetry. If you don't know what blackout poetry is, it's choosing words on a page to make a poem and then blacking out the rest of it with a Sharpie marker. So I have instructions here for you. Or collage poetry. You can cut out words from a magazine or an old book and make a poem. Or you can use the refrigerator magnet poetry, which is, I actually have some of that on my refrigerator that my sons and I will occasionally turn into poetry. Pictures and art can also inspire our creativity and be used as poetry prompts. So if you have an interesting picture or there's a painting in your room or something, those things can be huge inspirations for poetry. And then found poetry is also one of my favorites. So here are some instructions for that. You can let a kid pick a book from your library and then tell them they can pick a line from pages, and then you just list a number of pages and then challenge them to arrange those lines into a poem. So I turned that into a prompt that you can use with your students. So pick a line from pages 7, 25, 68, 80, 101, 132, 179. And I actually did that with The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which is one of my favorite books. And I wrote a poem called Seasons Change. Autumn. It was a lonesome Saturday. The turnip pot crackled. Not for a moment did I love the lies or the money. Maybe she wasn't so bad after all. I don't want to be ruined, except sometimes. And my last suggestion is make it a book. Kids feel super proud and encouraged when they see their name in print, and it can be something as simple as stapling those pages together and giving them a poetry book. So I just suggest collecting all of their poetry and turning it into a book that they can actually share with their family and friends. And then a bonus tip, be sure to include some blank pages for their continued play in poetry. And that's it. Happy creating.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I really liked that you put some example prompts in there. That way, if any of our librarians or our teachers or educators on the call want to practice this with their students, they'll be able to, and they have some great examples.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much for leading that lesson.
Yeah.
And so, great segue. We kind of got to see your joy for writing and creating when you were leading that poetry lesson. Tell us more about, what makes writing so fulfilling for you, why you love it, what motivates you to keep sharing stories, and then maybe some advice for our young readers who want to be writers.
So to the first question, this is, it's so generic, but I actually really love every part of the process, from getting the idea to taking it into a brainstorm to writing that first draft to the multiple revisions that have to happen. I think there's such energy, and it's like I come alive whenever I'm able to just, marinate with a story. It's really weird. I tell my kids I'm a better mom because I get to do this, because it just feels like this is what I was made for, if I can say something as cheesy as that. But I think a lot of it feels to me like putting a puzzle together. Like you have to have the certain pieces and you put them in the right place. And it's a challenge, it's like this brain challenge every single time you sit down to write. And you think after you write a book, you know how to do it. But every time you start a new book, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And there's kind of something fun about that. Like, you can't just distill it down to this formula, but it really is like a collaboration between you and your characters. And I don't know, there's something really magical about that. I would say the part I enjoy least is probably like offering it up for reviews and stuff. I'm a very sensitive person, and I think a lot of writers are. So, reviews are really hard, especially when they're not great reviews. So I tend to stay away from those just because, for my own mental health and well-being. So that's probably the part I enjoy least. And as far as what motivates me, I really have a deep desire to change lives and blaze light into the dark spaces. And so I think for me, it's really, I truly feel like books can be life-changing things, and that they can really encourage kids in their situations and show them a way forward. And so I think that's probably the biggest motivation for me, that if a kid or a teenager can read one of my stories and feel like, yeah, I am loved just because I'm me. I don't have to do anything else but be me. Like, that's a huge deal, I also want my readers to know the truth of the world. So, stories where everything ties up perfectly has not been my experience. And so I want to provide those stories where things may not necessarily tie up perfectly, but there's still hope in moving forward. So that's a really important thing for me too. And as far as advice that, one other thing too that motivates me is that I feel like I'm somewhere in all of the writing, I'm trying to tell 12-year-old, 11-year-old, 13-year-old, 16-year-old Rachel that she is magnificent just the way she is too, So all of that trauma I get to recreate into stories that have better endings, and that, teach you something that it took me 20 years to learn, that's a wonderful thing to me too. So
it definitely shines through your writing. Yeah.
well, thank you. I hope so. Advice that I would give to young writers and why they should keep creating is, I always want young writers to remember how fun writing is. So because they're natural storytellers, they usually have fun doing it. My kids and I, every summer, I give them writing prompts. And it's not something where they're just like, oh, I really don't want to do this, but they're like excited to do this. They get a writing journal every summer, and I give them prompts, and they can do as many as they want or as few as they want. And they just love creating. So I want kids to remember to keep creating for fun, but also don't get hung up on the judgment of your work. So, because we're all different people and we all like different things. So what one person likes, another person isn't going to like. And I want to encourage them in that. And they should keep creating, because I believe that we need all of those stories and that their story is important. So we need to make space for all of those stories. So
between your kids, do you think you have any future authors?
Well, it's funny, my sixth grader, I have twin sixth graders, they're identical twins. And one of them, I was leaving with his little brother to take him to the elementary school today. And he said, hey, wait, Mama, read this real quick. And he started a story, and it's like a scary story, and, it needs some work, but I was like, wow, this is a really great start. Good job. Keep going, So
oh, that's awesome.
I think there will be a few in there who maybe choose that. So
that's great. I like that they get to see your excitement for writing too as a model for when they're writing.
Yeah. Well, they're the first ones who read every one of my stories. So they
really?
love that. They're like, they tell their friends, and they're like, oh, she got a new ARC in today, and we got to read it before it goes on sale in like 6 months. So yeah, they're very proud of that.
I love that they brag about that. That would
Yeah.
make me feel so good.
It's great.
Awesome. So before we jump on to the next slide, I did want to go over our poll question number 4. We asked if people would rather be a lark or an owl. 20% of people said lark, and 80% of people said an owl.
Oh, wow. I am a lark myself. I get up at 4:15 every day.
Oh, wow.
So, wow, I'm in the minority.
I feel like I'm right in the middle.
Mhm.
So whatever that looks like. A dog. And more dog. All right. Nicole, do you want to kind of talk about what's next?
Yeah, so you hinted earlier that you were working on something else. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your future projects and maybe if we're even going to see more of Victoria?
Yeah, so we will see more of Victoria. She has another book coming out in May of 2024. And this one is, yeah, there we go. This is the first time I've been able to share this cover. So it's called Something Maybe Magnificent. Oh, wait, does it say? Yeah, okay. I was just making sure it said. And it's a story about, she's at her home this summer, and her mom has just introduced a man that is, their relationship is getting a little more serious. So Victoria is not ready for a stepdad, and she hatches this plan where she's just going to make him miserable and try to make him go away. So that's kind of what the story is about. It's about step-parent relationships. It is straight out of my experience with my stepdad, who has been my stepdad now for, I don't even know, 25 years or something. So he is very excited to read this story because he's like, did you put in this? And did you put in this? Because
That's
he knows
awesome.
I was not kind. And it was, it was a tough time. It's very, I think it's a little lighter than the first Magnificent Summer, and it has a little more humor and more of, Victoria being in her element at home. So it's a lot of fun. I love this story so much. So
I love the cover. The color palette is so great. I like how the first one kind of almost has like a early morning colors, and this one is a
yep.
little bit maybe in the evening. And you can see that, Victoria's gotten a little older. It kind of shows with the way she styled
Yes.
her hair and stuff. So I love it. I think it's really great.
Yeah.
It'll look great on bookcases and in everybody's libraries. And now I think we were going to have a speed round Q&A that Rebecca was going to transition into before we head out for today.
Yes. Also, Danielle from the chat pointed out Victoria still has her pointy toes.
She does. I know. I thought that was so great too.
We are so excited for your next book to come out. All right, so our speed round Q&A. We did try to address a lot of the questions that were sent in before the webcast happened. We tried to put those into our slides. The ones that we couldn't fit into our slides, we still wanted to get to. So thank you everyone who submitted such wonderful questions. And here we go. Okay. What was your favorite book growing up, Rachel?
See, this is like asking me what my favorite treat is. It's very hard to choose. I read so many books as a kid, but I think probably the one that I reread the most, which is kind of how I gauge what the favorite was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. I also reread a lot of times Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell, which,
that was one of my favorite.
Yeah, I loved all of his stuff. And then as I was a little bit older, Beloved by Toni Morrison was a huge love. Like I gave it a lot of love as a teenager. So
Fun fact, A Wrinkle in Time was a JLG selection really early on.
Really? Way back then. That's awesome.
And we have a letter from Eleanor Roosevelt kind of going to the book committee and saying, hey, this is why I think this book is so great for children. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Super special. Okay. Who was your favorite author growing up?
See, I'm going to have a list of these too. Okay. I wrote them down because I can't pick just one. I can't. So Toni Morrison, I've mentioned her, was a big one. Madeleine L'Engle, I read everything she wrote. Sylvia Plath was huge for me. And funny, in Something Maybe Magnificent, you know how in First Magnificent Summer, she's reading Virginia Woolf. In Something Maybe Magnificent, she's reading Sylvia Plath. So I had to bring that into it. And then Virginia Woolf was, of course, a big one. Lois Duncan. I don't know if y'all remember Lois Duncan, but I don't know what it was about her stories, but I read everything she wrote. So she was like thriller kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know.
I like that you have a little bit of everything.
Yep.
So one question we kind of covered during our webcast, but we'll see if you want to add anything to it. Who or what inspires you to write nowadays?
So I think that writing has just always been my go-to healing place. So just even in journaling or working out things in essay form or something like that, I think that's kind of what inspires me. But also my kids, I love, that's one of the things that I do when I read them stories before everybody else gets them, is I kind of gauge, like, what are they laughing out loud at? And what keeps them interested, and that kind of thing. So I think just creating things that bring people joy is a big deal to me. So
Awesome. So how did you settle on your title, The First Magnificent Summer? Where did this come from?
it's so funny because titles are usually really, really hard for me. But this one just came right to me. And I think it's right out of something that Victoria says, and she calls it her first magnificent summer with Dad. And as soon as she had that out there, I was like, well, that's the title of the book, you know? So, and typically when writers pick titles, you know, the publishing house will either want to change it or they'll want to workshop it or something, but this one just, it stuck all the way through. So yay.
Oh, good. I like to hear that.
Yeah.
We also kind of touched on this earlier, but are there any other messages that you want readers to take away from your story?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, that they're magnificent just the way they are, and that they don't have to do anything to be loved or to be deserving of love. So
Absolutely. That's a great message for everyone.
yeah.
And so what's your favorite recipe to bake?
See, that's like, I'm telling you, it's like asking me my favorite author. But I think if I had to choose, my favorite is pies. I love pie. And one of the things that we do when we bake is, we get to lick the spoons and stuff, and pie filling is the best. So I'll take pies any day.
I love a great apple pie.
Yep. Lemon meringue is the one I really love because there's something satisfying about, it's like lemon pudding, which is really good. But then the top of it, I made my first one like 2 years ago and it came out perfectly. Like the little tips were browned, and there's something satisfying about that, It's like,
Nice.
ask me again when it fails, but.
Do you watch the Great British Bake Off show?
Oh yeah, we totally do. We always, every year for the holidays, we record a video, a family video, where it's like our Christmas card to everybody. And this year we're going to do a Great British Bake Off, kind of everybody has to do a sugar cookie from scratch, and it's going to be a disaster, but it's going to be hilarious. So
That's so fun. Oh, I love that. And our last question came from an audience member. Would you rather camp or glamp?
Totally glamp. I cannot stand camping. The poem that Victoria has in there about things I like about camping, that was like straight from me and 12-year-old me, and insects everywhere. Yeah, I don't like it.
So we will not find you camping then.
That's right. I'll be in like a nice cabin. That's always nice.
Awesome. Well, that kind of wraps up our webcast. I just wanted to say thank you, Rachel, for joining us. You're a very, very talented writer, and we really got to see that shine through on this webcast. And I think it's really wonderful that you advocate for people who might be going through hard times, especially those younger readers who might need a hug in middle school.
Yeah.
The whole time I was reading, like, I just wanted to reach out and hug that figurative Victoria.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing this story with readers, especially at that pivotal age and time. We know how busy your schedule is, so we really appreciate you dedicating all the work and effort up to this webcast, and this hour and 20 minutes.
Well,
and
thank you for having
me. Come back anytime.
me.
Another thank you. We did want to thank all of our webcast librarians, educators, and anyone else who was able to jump on the call. Thank you for making literature more accessible to young readers. Thank you for believing in literature and for sharing great stories. We couldn't do what we do without you. And so here at JLG, it's our mission to get those best children's books into the hands of readers, however that looks, whether, it's in a school library, maybe it's in a public library, maybe it's in some shared libraries and classrooms, however that looks. So if you've enjoyed today's webcast or any of our previous webcasts, and maybe you'd like to learn more about JLG or the categories we offer, or how we support 17,000 libraries across the nation, please visit our website or send us an email, and we'd be happy to give you some more information. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole now for her last words. And then Nicole, when you're done, if you want to turn the mic over to Rachel.
Sure. No, thank you so much, Rebecca, for putting this together and helping with the marketing department, the whole marketing team, helping to work with the editorial department to get this organized. And thank you again, Rachel, for, of course, all your time and your really wonderful poetry lesson, and also your vulnerability in answering so many of these questions. I know a lot of them touched on some of your personal experiences and things that are a little more difficult to talk about. We really appreciate that honesty and vulnerability, and I'm sure that the audience really enjoyed having that moment of sort of connection through the screen as well. And we're all very excited to read the next book in Victoria's sort of summer adventures and getting to see where your career goes. And I know that as a reader on the middle grade team, I'm especially excited to see what you come out with next. But this was a really wonderful conversation, and I'm really happy to have been able to be a part of it. So I'll turn the mic back over to you, Rachel, and you can provide some closing remarks, and then we can all head on back to whatever it is that we'll have to do with the rest of our days.
All right. I just thank you all for having me, and thank you everybody who showed up and for your insightful questions and allowing me to, speak from the heart and talk about things that are important to me. So appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Also, real quick, Rachel, if you want to tell everyone what they're kind of looking at on the screen here and where they can find these materials.
Oh, yeah. So for the release of the first Magnificent Summer, I put together some tips for aspiring writers that are written in Victoria's voice. So it's from a 12-year-old, and then some of the prompts that she would give to whoever was interested in, doing some writing. There's journaling prompts, poetry prompts, and then just whatever prompts. So those are available for free download at racheltoalson.com/magnificent. And you can also see all of the videos that I made about, I think one's about journaling and one's about anxiety and some of these things that you can feel free to share with students or whatever you want to do. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rachel. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week and a great weekend.